Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. Or will we have to repeat the Om? Yes. The conference is passing fast. Okay. The one and the many. That's the subject for this morning from my little infusion here. The one and the many identifying as either or both. I don't give you the option of none. A necessary change of identity. So from the Tibetan, let the army of the Lord, responsive to the word, cease their activities. Let knowledge end in wisdom. Let the point vibrating become the point quiescent, and all lines gather into one. Let the soul realize the one in many, and let the word go forth in perfect understanding. I am the worker and the work, the one that is. So I'll say there'll be a little bit of, sort of pondering as we go along here today, because some of these ideas, you have to allow time for them to sink in. So let's, we'll ask ourselves some questions here, and I won't really, give you time to come to the conclusion, because any one of these questions you could ponder for a week or more, But we'll ask nonetheless. Am I a distinct individual? Time's up. We tend to act that way, do we not? However, is not such an identity very temporary? Now, let's just suppose I say, yes, I am a distinct individual. So did this distinct individual exist in a previous solar system? Did this distinct individual exist in a previous universe of which there are an infinitude, no matter where you start? That's the amazing thing, you can start back a trillion U ago, I like that little coined word, UAGO, universes ago. You can start back a trillion U ago and you're still preceded infinitudinously with appearing and disappearing universes. I feel I have to, give a hit into the abstract mind once a day, just. Okay, so how many universes, after all, has the great breath breathed? Were you a distinct individual? You can tell I'm hinting at the word no. Well, I think it's better to think of oneself as, it's understandable that we would think that somehow, as a distinct individual, we have perpetuity of some kind. It's understandable, it's practical, but I think it is mistaken identity. I think we're all just really suffering from a huge case of mistaken identity. But in a different way, It's not like having a bunch of credit cards under different aliases. It's better to think of oneself, I think, as I'll make an adjective, a noun, as an indivisible. To think of oneself as an indivisible, And when you look at the word individual, it can mean the same thing, and indivisible. And apparently, as universes unfold forever, it will be a forever repeated mistake, even while the mistake is not happening on the higher levels of our identity. So it will be forever repeated to not only enter the cyclic Mahamaya. What do I mean by a Mahamaya? The great illusion, right? Actually, I mean a universe. When DK talks about a great illusion, it doesn't mean that. He means something far more practical. But I'm calling the Mahamaya the great universe. Any one of them. Each one of them is a Mahamaya. And also, it's going to be repeated forever, cyclically, that we will become the Mahamaya. We will become the Mahamaya. We are right now the Mahamaya, and we are not the Mahamaya. So can we contain paradox? That's the question. Now, on an immediate and practical level, just right, what we can do, if I can withdraw my sense of identity from the tiny atomic lives and from the lunar lives associated with it and from everything, all these little atomic units that somehow are making up my vehicles, I've got to start in this process of becoming what I really am rather than confusing what I am with what I think I am. So if I can do this through contemplation, then contemplation is no easy thing. Sometimes we say, well, go meditate on that, go contemplate that. That's just a loose use of the word. If I can do this through real contemplation, the highest part of which for us is samadhi, I may discover, and here's another paradox, that I am just as much you as you are you. Uh-oh. You mean I'm to blame for everything you've done? Okay. Well, language splits things up, but think about that I am, every once in a while you can get yourself in that state where you kind of realize it, that I am just as much you as you are you. Now, so ponder on that. Now, for many people, that would defy logic. If we're dealing with a separative consciousness in which distinct aspects of our perceptions seem all distinct from each other, that would defy logic. Like I said, when I was out for a walk with my youngest son, the theme of the walk was even the asphalt. So we could call such a process as we begin to withdraw the beginning of expansive identification, such as the Christ was expressing for us in the chapter 17 of John. And the Tibetan tells us to really pay attention to that, because he says that's the great statement about identification. Of course, in a way, the Brahmanistic religion and Vedantists and all that, they've been saying it all along. But the Christ had a different way of saying it, which involved the immediate people in his ring past not. So it became much more, personally impersonal, impersonally personal. It's more down to earth. So if we could do that, it would be verging toward the limits of inclusiveness of which the human being is initially capable. Later we'll be capable of much more. But right now we just want to be happy about being initially capable of some small measure of identification. And you can see that I'm working at this, trying to get here by a third-rate method. I'm not asserting the fact. I'm not loving my way into identification. I'm trying to think my way into identification here and kind of share that with you from the perspective of the abstract mind. So if we, let's categorize some identities which we will encounter upon the way, and it's your own identity. I've got three little identities here, and let's see if we can choose or maybe make one out of three. All right, there is a lesser one, which we all, as individualized human beings, we identify as that lesser one. Here I am. I've got an incarnation. I'm born, I live, I die. Here I am. Then I go to Devachan, or then I don't. Here I am. That's the lesser one. And until the greater light really begins to shine or to dawn, that lesser one attracts most of our attention. The thought that you can be other than you are is not in the minds of many, okay? So that's the common identity. Then here's another identity. Then there are the many, in relation to which we initially see sort of a constant, possibly a constant I in the many. Maybe we call it group consciousness. But at first we might see a lot of many. Like, maybe we'll concentrate on the people that are in this room today. The many, there are distinct chairs. It's not one chair. There are distinct people. But maybe through what I call infuception. It's like perception, only it sees that which infuses. Maybe we'll begin to feel, as we observe the many, only identicality. That would be a transition from many little perceptions into one great perception, and there we would fuse the many toward the one, toward one something, whatever we want to call it. So it just depends on whether our mind is preoccupied by lots of different distinctions. You got to go through the forest of error first. Everything is distinct. Or whether we can fuse the many into one while preserving, practically speaking, the distinctions and never losing the thought that the many really are the one. I would say try that, but I have no time, so just hold on. Okay. Then, next, the third identity. So we've had the little one, we've had the many. Now, on the road of what I call emanative retraction, you've gone forth as an emanation from the one without ever losing your identity as it. But on this road, the prodigal son goes home eventually, tired of eating the husks. And on this road of emanative retraction, there are ever more inclusive spheres with which we begin to merge. They are all bounded by limited perception. But they lead, I am the planet, I am the sun, I am the galaxy, all that kind of thing. That can be so badly, exaggerated by people who have no practicality whatsoever. But there's a deep truth in it after all. So all of these bounded, limited spheres with which we begin to identify become eventually the great universal sphere. And what has that sphere to do with our identity? That is the universal logoic sphere. And it, in my view, it is finite. Huge, relatively, but finite. So we've had three encounters: the little one, the many, and the big one. Of course, there's another encounter awaiting. Maybe I'll get into that tomorrow. As we succeed in lifting and removing all rings past naught, because rings past naught are just boundaries of perception. As we succeed in lifting and removing all rings past naught, we arrive at this sphere, which holds the content of any bounded universe within itself. And we discover, finally, that we are, it sounds preposterous, but it's been done infinitudinous times, and you can't be definite about it. We discover that We are that all-embracing universal self, just as the Vedantists have been telling us all the time. We are that all-embracing universal self. You know, for 5 illusory minutes a day, one should try it. And one day we realize, yet again, that at least universally, the great universal logos, because of its habitual self-extension into increasing limitation, is the source of all misperceived variety. So let me repeat that so I can understand it. And one day we realize that, at least universally, the great universal logos, because of its habitual self-extension into increasing limitation, is the source of all misperceived variety. There is not one emanation. You know, Buddhists are big on emanation, and so are the Gnostics, and they really have something on it. There is not one emanation, or I call it partialization, which is not essentially the universal one, and really infinitely more, but that's another subject. Firstly, in all this, who or what are we? Are we that emanated little one? Are we actually the multiplex, though finite, many? Or are we the one from which all the limited ones and all multiplexifications derived? I love that word. It has to do with generated variety through misperception. What are we in all this? Or are we all three simultaneously? And how is it possible, how would that be possible, to be the lesser one, all the many, and the universal one simultaneously? So let's dwell on that for a moment. Can you simultaneously conceive of being all three? The little one, the many, and the greater universal one. I recommend at least a half an hour on that one. It's too short to just take a minute. Okay. Is it possible to be the part, the many parts, and the wholeness from which all parts derived? See, this question of identity is just so key because it's causing, through misperception, all kinds of terrible, glamorous, and illusory errors. But, you know, the trouble is you have to kind of hang around in incarnation a while before it begins to dawn on you that there is, after all, a problem. Is it possible to be the part, the many parts, and the wholeness from which all parts derive? So, in order to determine that, we'll have a visualization. And maybe that will get us started on the path of, you know, every day a little bit, not too much, not too much, but a little bit, deal with these fundamental ontological issues, because they lie at the heart of what we call the great illusion, in which we're all more or less trapped, okay? So let's have a little visualization. It's like a meditation, only it's shorter. So, first of all, get a sense of the little one. That's you, as you normally think you are. Your energy system, you know, the vehicles, even the subtle vehicles. Get a sense of that. The reincarnating one, you know. That little extension, that little emanation which has taken many forms over millions of years, and who knows what before. Now, focus imaginatively or opening your eyes quickly and just taking it in. Focus on the many in this room. I mean, it could be everything, you know, every apparently inanimate object, but we'll just focus on people for a minute. Focus on the many in this room. You're sitting here with a lot of people, many of them. Now, imaginatively open your heart center between the shoulder blades until you begin to feel a certain sense of inclusiveness regarding the many. And then imaginatively open your heart in the head center above the head until you get the sense of feeling and registering higher energies which are not of the form, not of the customary form. Visualize that. And there are other 12s that can be in this alignment, the 12-fold egoic lotus and the 12-fold monadic vehicle. But we can't necessarily center in those at will. Now, so there's an alignment here. Heart and heart in the head, and in line with the 12-fold egoic lotus on the mental plane, higher mental plane, and even kind of opening the possibility that the 12-fold monad, which knows identification, is somehow in the alignment. Now, through the power, that power of perception, which I call infuception, through the power of infuception, imagine a substantial, pervading essence everywhere the same, especially here, but really across the earth and everywhere the same, and this essence is you. Seems a strange way to consider you, but remember that Christ said, I am the light of the world. Hermes said, I am the light of the world. The Buddha was the light of the world. How can they say that? So there's this pervading essence right here, let's say, and it is you. Now, transfer your identification or transfer your sense of the many into that essence until each one of the many that are here, allow each one of the many to become that essence. It's a very subtle thing to do. As you do this, you're bringing into focus what the Greek philosophers called the same. The same. This essence, this sameness, all the many are absorbed into it. It pervades them, and they have no distinct separative identity of their own. Just don't let any person here become distinct in the sense of being separate from this same. And keep the essence so strong, so pervading, that it overwhelms any distinction you may be tempted to perceive. Keep your heart open. That's very important. Keep the center above the head open. And maybe some little sense of this same will dawn. And somehow realize that all these many have, in your perception, your infuception, become the one. Because you are viewing all these many, all these individuals, apparent individuals, and all things, as the Tibetan says, from within yourself. From within yourself. And do not allow any separateness to enter this field of sameness, of essence. Well, let's hope that our perceptions can become more penetrating in this matter, and that we can really begin to distinguish the Maya and the illusion from the underlying reality. The acute energy of divine mental perception, and within it are the magical formulas which can turn the many into one. So in my next book, I'm going to try to offer some of those formulas, which pondered can help turn the many into the one. It's worth doing, I think, because then we can step across the boundary that keeps us within the great heresy of separateness. It's worth doing. Okay, thank you.